border with Indonesia. And I obviously didn't spend enough time planning this because I didn't think to put a map up for you, but from Vanimo, once I get there, my parents will meet me there. From Vanimo, so this picture here is actually a picture, the view of what we see from where we stay when we're in Vanimo. We're on the Waterstone Church grounds, stay with a church member there, and the ocean is just right across the street. So it's a beautiful area. It makes going out to town kind of feel almost like a mini vacation, kind of, sort of, at least in regards to the location. When we first arrived in the country, we spent actually several months in Vanimo before we were able to make it out to our village. We stayed in the home of one of the local pastors and had fun figuring out how to make do with some of their cooking utensils and whatnot. The pastor and his family actually didn't have much of anything as far as cook stove and stuff like that, so we ended up purchasing some things and making toast. Then we took 2 big vehicles with all of our stuff out to the river on July 4 of last year. So it's been just a little over a year that we've been out to the village. Quite a few people from the church in Waterstone came along to help with loading and unloading because there was a lot of heavy stuff. And once we got out to the river, then we loaded everything onto 4 canoes, dugout canoes that were powered by motors that they had tied together with a log frame of sorts. And then they used roofing iron that we had purchased to make a bed over the top of that frame, and then they piled everything on top of that. And the water was super low at the time, as you can tell. Quite often the water is up high enough where none of that ground is actually above water. It's usually underwater. But yeah, lots of fun memories. This was the welcoming committee. How many of you have actually gone online and seen any of our videos? Okay, so quite a few of you have seen some of this. Looks somewhat familiar to you then, because I've put some videos up of the welcome that we received, the song that they sang. But the church in Tipas had been praying that God would send somebody. And they built a little house in preparation for God answering their prayer because they believed that he would answer their prayer. And then we showed up. And they just could not believe that we would actually come back because we lived there in the 90s when I was little and had left for various reasons. And the fact that God would bring us back to them just totally floored them. This is the little house that they had created for us. We kind of rigged up this method of collecting rainwater because we didn't have our water tanks set up yet, and it decided to give us a tropical downpour the day after we got there. And so we kind of tried to figure out a way to collect that water so we'd have clean drinking water. And we had to do it in the rain, but we managed to collect quite a bit. So far in the year we've been there, we have not run out of water. And that is such a huge blessing because we haven't had huge water tanks to store the water. So God has just, every time it gets low, he sends a storm and it comes back up again. So on a sunny day, this is what it looked like. Mom is outside. That was her initial attempt at a dishwashing table, a 55-gallon drum with a piece of plastic on the top of it to try to give herself a little table. Running water was, well, if you dip it in the bucket and then you pour it out, then that's when it's running. So dishes were outside, laundry was outside. We did bring a little laundry machine, so we had, once Dad got the solar power set up, then we could do laundry, just dumping buckets of water into the laundry machine and letting it do its thing. And that's been a huge blessing. Our container that we thought we would have to live without for a good 6 months, because we thought it would just take that long to get there, it actually got to Tipos before we did. So that was a huge blessing. God knew that we would need the items in that container right away, and he made it so that it would get there. We also brought out a propane stove and propane tanks so that we could have stove and oven. And as you can see there, Mom got started with making bread pretty quickly. It is really good. So this is Drake and his wife, Eta. They're both Adventists. Drake is 85 or 86. His house is on the other side of the lake from the main village, and he still gets in his canoe and stands up and paddles it every Sabbath to come to church. So God has really blessed him with good health. He's a very faithful member to come every Sabbath. If you can click on, this is a video, if you can just click on it to, let's see if, oh, there we go. We needed to get to the other side, and we didn't have our own canoe yet, so we took a ride in one of their little tippy dugout canoes. Those little canoes are barely wide enough for the hips if you're lucky. The men's canoes are typically even narrower than that, and sometimes they're only as wide as 1 foot. And they'll have 1 foot in the bottom and 1 foot on the edge to balance, and then they'll paddle. That particular one is big enough for us to sit down in, so. So one of the challenges that we've had, I was going to wait to actually play that, has been to build our house. And it started with logs, some of which were already laying down, some of which we had to have a team of helpers help us cut them down. And then we used a Lucas mill to create the lumber. And then we had to use a planer to get that lumber planed so that it was all the same size. Because with the Lucas mill, you have variability. So sometimes it'll be the right dimensions on one end, but then it kind of gradually gets to a different dimension on the other end. Various things. So this demonstrates one of the trees that we had to cut down. You'll notice all of the, well, I don't know what they're called. I didn't do that. No, I guess it's not going to play again. Anyhow. What? I think they're doing stuff up there too, and I'm trying to do something, and it's just confusing There we go. That log is over 5 feet diameter. It gave us some pretty good lumber. I believe we got flooring out of it. So this is the Lucas mill. Dad spent a few days, or maybe a week or two, training a team of guys on how to operate it, and then we set them loose, and they carried that. The Lucas mill is very portable, so they would carry the mill to where the logs were. They would have to sometimes dig around the logs to bring them up out of the ground if they had sunk in too far, or roll the log to a different location to be able to set the sawmill up around it. But over the course of several months, there's some more of the logs. The logging company actually let us, they used their big bulldozer to pull some logs to us, which was really handy. But over the course of several months, our piles of lumber started getting bigger, which was such a blessing. We started out building our house on mission property, and then started realizing that maybe being on mission property wasn't such a good idea since this is our personal house. And the people who had donated the mission property still kind of felt like they had a say over what happened on the mission property. And they wanted to control who operated our sawmill and who did this, who did that. And we said, no, that's not how it's going to work. Let's move off of mission property. So it took all the way till November before we finally found a piece of land that we could build on. And it's only about 1/4 of a mile from the mission property, so it's not far enough away to be an issue, but it's far enough that we can have our own separate space. And then later on, if the mission, like if we had built our house on the mission ground, there could have been the potential that later on, when we're not as useful anymore, they could ask us to move off the property so they could have the house. And we didn't want that to happen because this is my parents' retirement home. So anyhow, so the guys milled all the lumber for us and brought it to the building site. The tree that we're using is a type of ironwood, and it has a very dark red blood, and it stains. Pretty much anything, well, I have a whole supply now of clothes that are nothing but work clothes because they have Quila stain on them. And that's my hand, and it stayed that color for several weeks before the stain wore off, no matter how much I scrubbed it with diesel or whatever else I could find to scrub it with. In fact, in town, some clerks at a local store admitted to me that they nearly asked me if I wanted to use their restroom to wash my hands before I shopped in their store. So this is our house building site. Piles of lumber just stacked neatly, ready to go. We initially were planning to do a concrete floor, but then the villagers told us that this place floods. And so we decided to put the floor up. Periodically, we'd have to make trips to town, usually about every once a month. So it would take about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours by boat, and then 5 hours by car to get to town to get supplies. We have a dugout canoe with motor on it as well, but this dinghy is what we use mostly with a 75 horse so that we can get where we need to go a little bit faster. We changed from using a big giant truck to using just a smaller Land Cruiser. It was more practical for our needs. And you never know on this road what you're gonna find. Sometimes bridges are out that you don't even realize it is a bridge until the dirt disappears, and then the other people will come and just put logs so that you can cross it. Other bridges are giant logs, and sometimes water gets washed out from underneath it, and the end of the log just sinks down, and the other ends stick up, and you just can't get through. So every time you take a trip, you never know if you're going to get stuck on one side or the other. So rather than doing concrete floor, we did concrete footers, and then Dad built foundation walls on top of that, has it bolted into the concrete. The gravel was a bit of a challenge because the dump truck that brought it to us from the logging company got stuck about half a mile away from the building site and had to dump it there. So we call this the tipas tipper. In Australia, a tipper is a dump truck. This is my little scooter. It's designed for town pavement use, but I was able to carry 2 5-gallon buckets of gravel along with a wooden box of gravel on the seat behind me. And each trip I took was enough to fill up a wheelbarrow, and then Dad added the right amount of cement powder and mixed it, poured it while I went to get another load of gravel. And we kept up with each other. So that was one of the days we poured one one of the 30-foot long footers, and it took about 16 loads of wheelbarrow loads of yeah. So progress being made. This was middle of November when we were finally getting the house off the ground. And villagers would come periodically to help out, especially during the framing stage. We would get a team of 7 or 8 guys to lift each of the walls. The hardwood is, not only does it stain, but it's very heavy. It sinks in water, and a kind of wall that here in the US, my dad could lift just the 2 of us. We kind of needed somebody on nearly every stud with this wood because it's just way too heavy to lift up otherwise. We also did a workshop behind the house. We got the workshop done first, actually, so that we could empty out the container. The metal container would get super duper hot, and then when it cooled off, it would condense and cause rain inside. So even though it was waterproof, all of our boxes were getting wet and books were getting wet and then getting moldy, and just so that was our first priority so that we could empty the container. Putting the roofing on, again, we had some villagers that helped. We didn't put the floor in until after we did the roofing because we didn't want the floor to get ruined by direct sunlight. So once the roof was on, this is Dad working on the flooring. Every single one of those floorboards, and there's over 600 of them, had to go through the planer a minimum of 4 times, the table saw twice, and then the router twice to create the tongue and groove. So every single one of those boards we lifted and put through a machine a minimum of 10 times. So, and it was a lot of work. Dad and I spent the better part of a month just processing flooring. And we were going to do wood for the siding as well. And when it took us a full month just to do the floor, we said, let's look at other options for the siding. Because this is taking way longer than we want to take. This is again upstairs now. He's putting the floor in. This Quila is a very beautiful wood, and it has created a very nice floor. So this is inside downstairs. We used a metal siding, and then we had brought some reflective insulation with us, and so on the walls where there's a lot of direct sunlight hitting it, we've put up that reflective insulation to try to diminish the oven effect. But unlike concrete blocks, this thin metal sheeting does at least cool off fairly quickly at night. So by the time it's bedtime, it's cooled off to maybe 85 or 86, and that's pretty sleepable, especially with a fan on. Our temperature range that we typically experience, the lowest I've seen is 74, the highest I've seen is 93, I believe. So we don't have a big range, but humidity is typically 80 to 90%, so it feels a lot hotter than it is. So a month later, I believe this was in April, Dad was starting to do some of the inside walls. There were certain walls he wanted really well braced, and so we used the wood siding with a lap on it to create the walls inside. Other walls that weren't instrumental in bracing the house, we just used a 1/4-inch plywood to create the barrier between rooms. But the wood siding looks really nice. And then Dad started working cabinetry. Here he's gotten started on installing the kitchen countertop. At least he's gotten the floor of the cabinet put in. Just every day we just plug away on what we can plug away on. He's got some of the wiring in. You can see the wires going through. So this is what it looks like when it's flooded. This is the highest water we've seen. There's about ankle depth on the majority of the property, but if you go back behind the house and behind the workshop, it was almost knee deep because it's lower ground back there. So we changed our plans for what we were going to do that day because of the water, we wanted to work inside instead of outside. And then inside the house, this was the day we moved in. We got the fridge moved in. We've got our stove in there. The countertop is done. The sink was not plumbed yet. There was a different sink that Dad rigged up to be able to use for washing dishes and stuff. The countertop there is a rosewood countertop that Dad built. We have a matching table that is still in construction process. And then upstairs is where the bedrooms are. The 2 guest bedrooms are the ones you can see the doors for. And then that little space is so that's one guest bedroom, the other guest bedroom, Mom and Dad's room. And Dad's got some of the shelving and stuff in there so that we had started opening boxes. And that was kind of like Christmas, because at this point, it was close to a year since we had loaded the container, and so we didn't remember what we'd brought. A good share of it, we're like, why did we bring this? Obviously haven't needed it. So this is in my room. I requested a kind of a walk-in closet, so Dad figured out a way to do that for me. And then another big thing, this was one of the final projects that we worked on before I left, and that was pouring some concrete steps down it towards the water. Because when the water goes really, really low, the mud is really, really deep. And it's really hard to get into the boat without getting really dirty. And Mom kind of has a tendency to do slip and slide. And so Dad, well, first of all, Jason, a young man who has helped us tremendously, I call him my little brother, and he calls Mom and Dad Mom and Pops. So he's part of the family. And he came and he dug the ground to create this ditch area that you see so that Dad could come in and put the forms in and then pour the cement. And that's the finished product. So we poured 20 steps, and when I was talking with Dad not too long ago, he mentioned that the water had dropped even farther and he was able to put in another 13 steps. So the water fluctuates a lot. And this was only less than a week from when it had been flooded. So it's not just like inches that it'll drop. It'll drop 4 feet, 6 feet in a night. And sometimes during the daytime even, you can gauge how much it's going down and actually watch it kind of drain. It's kind of like draining a bathtub. It feels like a bathtub too, because the water temperature gets up to like 114 degrees on the surface. Yeah, the water. So I don't actually go swimming a lot because it's not that refreshing. What's that? Yes, we can only imagine. Well, it's not that great. So this is when the water is up a little bit higher. I just love this shot. That's our boat, the mountain in the background. That mountain is, on the other side of that mountain is where AMA is, another people group. And one of the reasons, actually the main reason I'm here in the States right now is because my best friend just got married, and she married a pastor who is currently in the process of fundraising to come to the AMA tribe through AFM. And because she married him, she's coming with him, and I'm really excited about that. because Amma is just over those mountains from us, and it's not that far. So we feel like God is really building a team to finish his work in this area. And we see him working, we see people's interest is peaking, and it's just exciting to be part of it. So I haven't just been doing building. The people also come to me with various medical requests. Most often it's malaria. They come, they have malaria. I test their finger, test their blood, just prick their finger like you would for a blood glucose. And have a little testing kit that I can check and see what kind of malaria they have, if they have it, and then treat appropriately. The man who's in charge of malaria treatment for the area is an Adventist in Vanimo, and so he keeps me supplied with the test kits and the medications. But sometimes they'll come with more severe things. This particular young man was involved in a fight, ended up getting cut by a machete, and cut an artery. And it was several hours before they were able to get him to me because he was over in Amma when it happened. And so his friends were able to get tourniquets of sorts. Like they wrapped things around his arm tightly, but not so tightly as to cut off all circulation. And they were able to slow it to just an ooze, but they hadn't been able to get it completely stopped. And so they had also put mud on it, which didn't help any, but I tried to wash it out as best I could without disturbing the giant blood clot that was on top of it. But I ended up just putting some gauze over it and putting an ACE wrap on it to create pressure. And that fully stopped the bleeding. And then the next day we called our emergency helpline, you could say. There's a non-denominational Samaritan Aviation that is based out of the town of Wewak, which is downriver a long ways from us. But I can call them because I have cell signal right outside my house. I can call them, and in cases of emergencies, life-threatening emergencies, they will come and pick up patients for us with their float plane. So the young man who cut his hand really badly, I called them to come and get him because there was also probably some broken bones in there and whatnot, so he needed to get to the hospital. So it's a big thing when the plane comes. Usually the whole village turns out to watch. So one of the first things that happened when we were there, there was an old man in the village by the name of Yaupa, and his family is the ones who have given all of the land for the mission. He himself was actually responsible for asking AFM to send them a missionary back in the 90s. He was an old man then, so he was really old now. But so he was he's been part of our story for this whole entire time. And he passed away, and this particular gathering was his funeral. And Dad was able to share a few words there. They asked him to share, and so it was a blessing to be able to be there with them during that time. So this leaf is called doctor leaf or miracle leaf. It's one of the leaves that grows readily in our jungle area there that can be used to heal sores and whatnot. And one of my biggest problems there with the medical side of things, the people will scrape their legs, they'll get a sore somewhere, they'll step on a thorn, or they'll scratch a mosquito bite. And then 10 days later, they'll come to me with an infected sore. And they'll say, "Can I have some amoxicillin?" And I'll say, "Well, have you covered it to keep the flies off of it?" "Well, no." Have you tried doctor leaf? Have you put any doctor leaf on it, or papaya leaf, or any of these other leaves that I've learned about that grows in your village, in the jungle? Have you done anything at all? Well, no. Well, did you know about these things? Well, yeah. Well, why didn't you do it? And I tell them, I'm not going to give you amoxicillin. You're going to go home and you're going to use the natural remedies that you have available in your jungle. And if it doesn't work, then come back and see me in a week. And then we'll think about giving you some amoxicillin, if I have any. I haven't had a single one of them come back. So there's a lot of education, health education, that needs to be done. They have received a lot of training, so to speak, that if they just go to the health clinic and get a pill, it'll fix all their problems. And they're given amoxicillin for the common cold, for a cough, for anything. Never mind that that's not the right drug. They'll give it to them because they came to see me, so I have to give them something. It's kind of the mentality of the nurses. And who knows, maybe it's pneumonia. Maybe this cough is pneumonia. The person is walking and talking and not having any respiratory difficulty, so it's probably not pneumonia, but minor detail. Anyhow, there's a lot of health education that needs to happen. And we're working on developing a clinic there, working with the CPIC mission, because I have to go through the proper channels to get an official clinic that's government recognized. And we'll actually be able to have workers that are Adventist working there with me so that I'm not the one in charge, which is really nice, because then I'm free to go from village to village and do more of the health education type of work. So that's in the process. This particular instance, they came to me with a woman who was bleeding vaginally, not because of childbirth or anything. It had just started happening. And they wanted to take her down to May River, but they wanted to check with me first to see if there was anything I could do. I said, well, there's really nothing I can do. I don't have anything for that. I have no idea what's even causing it. But somebody had a random IV needle and IV fluid bag, so I put that in and gave her some fluids as she traveled down to May River. So May River is about a 3-hour boat ride from us. As far as I know, she's totally fine and back to normal. Just another beautiful picture. We just cannot get enough of the beauty of our area. And I especially love the one picture frame where it has a mountain in it, because I miss the mountains. Tipas itself does not have any mountains. And even that mountain is covered with really, really thick jungle, so I can't just go and climb on them. So Pastor Peter Ollie and his wife Ruth. Pastor Peter is the smiling guy right behind me in the picture, and Auntie Ruth is sitting beside me. He's a retired pastor. You probably recognize the name. He's my dad's best friend. He was the CPIC mission president when we were there in the 90s. And every time Dad has gone back to PNG, he has connected with him and traveled with him. And so their relationship, they're brothers. And he's retired, but he's still very involved in church work, mission work. And he and his wife came and lived with us for about 3 months just to help with our church there and helping get things organized and whatnot. So this was when we brought them down. In spite of the fact that he had been the CPIC mission president, he hardly ever was able to get to travel on the CPIC River because of finances. The budget didn't allow for that kind of travel. And so they're both just super excited to be traveling on the river and coming out to an area that had been part of their domain, so to speak, but they had never been able to really access. The people also gave them a huge welcome. Pastor Peter had traveled with Dad when they did their exploratory trip, end of 2022. And so they all knew him, and they were excited to see him again and meet his wife. So more of their welcome. And he immediately just started being the pastor. And this is a church that has never had a pastor before, so it was such a blessing to have a pastor who was able to really connect with the people on their level. That particular, I don't know if you can see the pussycat, the kitty cat there on the bench. His name is Tinfish, and he comes to every church service and every Wednesday night prayer meeting and every Friday night Vespers. He loves being with people. So if people are coming into the church, he's going to come into the church. And there's even been times when instead of sleeping on the bench, like you see him doing there, he'll wander along on the ground and just come and sit at the feet of whoever is doing the speaking and just look up at them as if he's listening. So this is the inside of our church, from the front looking down. We have maybe 30 faithful members attending. When Pastor Peter and his wife were there, we typically had more than that coming, but once they left, then attendance kind of dwindled a little bit as well. But one of the really big things that happened is a health team from Vanimo actually came out to visit us for 2 weeks. Of the 7 members, not a single one of them had ever even been to the Sepik River. So they were kind of like tourists, even though they're nationals. And they just had so much fun. The boss lady who gave them permission to come, though, was afraid that they wouldn't see very many patients. And so she only sent a box of medicine, 1 box, and limited them to 7 members instead of the 10 requested, because she didn't want them to just be sitting around twiddling their thumbs doing nothing. Well, that boss person obviously is not familiar with what the bush is like. When there's no medical care, if word gets out that there's going to be a medical clinic happening, people come from a long ways. Some of them 3 days walk to get there. But they had fun on the trip, the road, the river. They were just having fun. 5 of the 7 were Adventist, and so the 2 Sabbaths that they were with us, they helped lead out in the church services and things, and it was just a lot of fun. First day of clinic, we ran out of medicine because we had nonstop people coming. And aid post workers, who probably would be the equivalent of maybe an EMT, who were looking after patients in other villages 3 days walk away, brought 20 patients with them that they couldn't treat, and they came to us. So we ran out of medicine that first day. We were able to arrange for additional medicine to be sent, and it was actually, God orchestrated it so that somebody knew somebody who was coming out to the river, and then that somebody knew whoever was driving the boat down, so the medicine actually got delivered to us without us having to go get it, which was a miracle. And they also did dental, because the leader of the group was a dentist, and so she set up clinic under the thatch. In the course of the 2 weeks that they were with us, they logged over 1,000 patients that they saw, contrasted with the 80 or 90 that their boss thought they would see. So I think that boss got schooled when they got back, got educated on what it's like out in the bush, and don't short us like that again. I helped with dispensing the medications. some of the days were rainy, and so we set up in different places, and they'd have to walk to see the doctor in one station, and then they'd walk over to this other building where we had set up underneath it to dispense what medications were prescribed and stuff. And then Auntie Ruth stayed busy cooking for the entire group. So she made sure that they had breakfast and lunch and dinner. And her accommodations are probably, her kitchen was probably not anything like a kitchen here in the States. But she was totally comfortable with it, just cooking out over the open fire. On Sabbath, we had a good turnout. People came to church, and then after church, we all went outside and just took pictures with the medical team. One of the first things we want to get done is build a new church, because that one is starting to fall apart. But and then me with the 5 members of the medical team that were Adventist. And then Sabbath evening, they did a program outside of the church on the lawn, health education, as well as a short devotional. And quite a few community members showed up for that as well. Sabbath afternoons, while they were there, we opened our house. We hadn't moved into it yet. We were still working on it, but we opened it up on Sabbath for everyone to come and have a potluck lunch where it was shady. So we had quite a few people come for that. And Mom there is just holding on to one of the babies and trying to make them laugh, because that's always fun. The people are somewhat shy. They come to us when they have problems, but if they think that we're not available, they won't actually call out or ask. Like they'll timidly maybe do a little knock, and if there's no answer, then they'll leave. So to have this many come and just hang out with us in our house and eat together was a really big thing, and it was a blessing. And then we loaded up the health team and had to take them back to town. There had been concern that the road was going to be non-passable, but God worked it out so that we had a couple dry days, so the mud holes weren't quite so bad, and we were able to get them back out. And then I shared a little bit about the communion service during church today. This church has not, like I said, hasn't had a pastor. And the elder that they've had is basically elder in name only. He's never been officially ordained. And so they never did a communion service. The majority of them had never even seen a communion service, let alone participated in one. And so several weeks in advance of when we wanted to do it, we started doing some education on the significance and the symbolism. And then the day of, we had one of the larger turnouts that we've had at the church. I think there were close to 80 people there. And for the foot washing service, the ladies just stood out under this mango tree while Mom and Auntie Ruth demonstrated and spoke about this, educated on the significance. I was behind the camera, so I didn't get to be part of that particular aspect. And then after the demonstration, we invited whoever wanted to participate to do so. And there were quite a few that did. The men also, my dad and Elder David, demonstrated and then invited the other men to participate. And then afterwards, we just joined together in a prayer. And then the rest of the Lord's Supper we went back into the church for. This was one of the few times, most of the time the women all sit on one side and the men sit on the other. But for some reason during the communion service, I think maybe because there were so many people that there wasn't enough room on the women's side for all of the women. And so we had a mixture. I just thought it was interesting. So one of the really exciting things that's happening, you may have read about it in my dad's newsletter, about the high school that might be given to the Adventist church to run. So this is the signboard that shows kind of a map of what the school is supposed to look like eventually. These buildings are all brand new, fully my brain is not wanting to think of the English word. They have everything in them, fully furnished. Thank you. And this school is high school, so grades 9 through 12, but it's not a fully recognized school yet by the government. So the teachers that are here, in order to get paid, they have to pretend to accept a position from a different school that hasn't been filled, and then they just work at this school. But the school itself is actually owned by a government person. So it's not under a church organization, it's not technically under the government. So this government person, who just happens to be an Adventist, is totally in charge of what happens to this school. And 3 weeks ago, when Pastor Leonard Sumatow, who's the secretary of the union, came out, Dad took him to see the school, and Pastor Leonard said, well, I'm actually personal friends with the person who owns the school, so I'll just go and talk to him and see if we can't get this school under the Adventist organization. And everyone that we have talked to is super excited about it, because in Papua New Guinea, the Adventist schools are the ones that turn out the best people, the best citizens, because we actually have some discipline, and we actually screen our teachers so that we don't have teachers that are just having drinking parties with the students after school in the evenings and encouraging that type of activity. The school here has been in operation for 3 years, but already in that 3 years, students have had to repeat grades because the teachers weren't there long enough for them to consider it a complete year. But it's very well built. There's plenty of room on the property for a farm to be put in so that they can grow their own food. This is one of the teachers, or two of the teachers, a married couple, and they're Adventists. And they're super excited about the idea that the school might be administered by the Adventist mission as well. So sometimes we have to deal with things that aren't just mud holes in the road. In this particular scenario, that was our truck at the time. We've sold it since then, but an elder at the church in Vanimo, we had given him the key and given him permission to use it for church work, as well as to hire out. People would hire him to use the truck to take them out to the river, and so on and so forth. Well, on one of his trips, because of various reasons, he was really late getting back. So when he goes out to the river and back all in one day, with this truck, it's more like a 7-hour drive versus a 5-hour drive with our little car. So it turns into a 14-hour round trip on extremely bumpy roads. And he was coming through this section. You can tell it's a bit of a hill. It's kind of in the foothills leading up into the mountains that you have to cross over to get to Vanimo. But he was coming to this area about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he fell asleep at the wheel, as did all of the other guys that were in the cab with him. They were all sleeping together. And because it was uphill, it slowed them down, but they woke up when the ground disappeared from under the back tire, and it just dropped down onto the axle. If it had not stopped, if it had not caught on the axle, it would have rolled all the way down and probably resulted in some loss of life. But as it was, the angels, I believe, kept the ground from breaking away from under the axle as well. And it sat there for quite a few hours while we waited for the logging company to bring a bulldozer to pull us out. I say us because Mom and Dad and I were on our way back to the river in our little truck, our Land Cruiser, and we passed them while they were in this situation. And we said, that looks like our truck. Oh wait, that is our truck. So we stopped and waited with them for the bulldozer. Just a happy smile. Just walking on the road, and we passed this young mother carrying her baby, and he was just giving such happy smiles, I couldn't resist taking a picture. Sometimes we do run low on water, and then Mom feels like she needs to not use the rainwater for washing clothes. This particular situation, the water was up high enough. This tree, the trunk is sideways, it's horizontal instead of vertical. And when the water's high enough, it goes underwater. And so she had a lot of fun actually doing laundry that day because she got to sit in the water. I see some, really? She's weird looks. But she's only done that once or twice, I think. Because usually the water, if we're running out of water, usually the lake water goes way down, and that trunk that you see is probably 30 feet above the water level or the ground. So she wouldn't walk across it then at that point in time. So we finally got our house built, moved in, and the people have helped us a lot with leveling the ground, and this was the first time that I got the lawnmower out to actually mow the grass. And it had gotten pretty tall. The grass was probably this tall already. And so I spent several days with the push mower getting it all knocked down, and it was just kind of fun. Part of the garden that I've done, I've grown ginger, turmeric. This is my first ginger harvest. And squash and cucumbers. My cucumbers haven't done so well, but squash does amazing. This is a pineapple that's growing on one of the plants close to our house. I never knew that the pineapple itself would bloom, so I thought that was really pretty. Snake beans. This is something that I pretty much keep growing continuously. When the plant starts to show a little bit like it's getting old, then I'll plant some more so that by the time one plant stops producing, I'll have another crop getting ready to produce. And you just cut them up like a green bean and saute them with a little bit of onion and garlic. So good. You can make a meal out of that. And then when Pastor Leonard Sumatow came 3 weeks ago, he did a baptism for us because we don't have a lot of ordained pastors that come. And we were super excited because the young man farthest away is Jason. And we've really been praying for him because his walk with God has kind of been like a yo-yo. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. We'll think that he's really solid, and then we'll hear reports that he got drunk or he hired his canoe out for a Sabbath instead of coming to church. But he himself started, I think, kind of feeling like this yo-yo wasn't as good, and he needed to make a decision. And when Pastor Leonard Sumatow was there, he made his decision and asked for baptism. But that's not the end of the story. Amen? That's the beginning. And now he is on fire and coming to every worship service and studying the Bible with my dad separately, and also we want to send him and another villager to Omaura Bible College, which is one of our Adventist training colleges for the ministry there. And they require that their students have finished 10th grade before they can go to that school. Well, Jason has only managed to finish 9th grade because then he got married, and none of the high schools will allow him to be in school when he's married. Because they're boarding schools, most of them, and they don't have housing for married students. So if he wanted to go to school, he and his wife would have to live separately. She would have to live in the girls' dorm, and he would have to live in the boys' dorm. That doesn't really work well for a married couple. So we had kind of hemmed and hawed about what plans we might have. And when Pastor Leonard Sumatau came, he said, oh, well, fill out the application and give it to me. They can't refuse anybody I send them. It doesn't matter if he doesn't have 10th grade. They will accept him if I send the application to them and tell them to accept him. And so next year, Jason and Bendo will be going to Omaura, and Jason will be going with his wife as well, with Melinda. So we're really excited about that. Bendo, you might recognize the name. If you remember a couple years before we left, Dad told the story of the whirlwind that pulled a piece of paper up out of the dirt and pasted it against somebody's leg. That was Bendo. So he too has kind of had his ups and downs in his spiritual walk. And we've had some frustrations with him because he has a big mouth and likes to talk negative about other people if they're not doing what he wants them to do, etc. But he also is moving in the right direction and will be going to the ministry training college as well. So I think that was the last of the pictures and videos that I had on my PowerPoint. Wow, it only took me an hour. But, oh no, here we go. The 10, so on the front row, the ladies have towels wrapped around them, all the way to Jason, who's standing next to my dad. All 10 of those people were baptized. And the people behind them are church leaders that are supporting them in their decision, welcoming them in. And then the final picture is Mom and Dad with Jason and Pastor Leonard Sumatau right next to Jason, and then Drake on the end. So I would like to open it up for questions. If anyone has some specific questions, there's some mics that will get passed around.
So I was just curious about Gideon Kend. Does that name sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so Gideon was a missionary that worked with us in Guyana, South America, and I'm sure he's told you about that.
Yes, he has.
Where is he located, and how is he connected with what you guys are doing?
So he is the regional supervisor stationed in Vanimo. So he is the person that we go to for our church organization, stuff like that, because he is our the highest church leader in our area. So he works under the CPIC mission, but we don't go to the CPIC mission headquarters. We can go through him to get things done. But he lives in Vanimo. He's also the church pastor of Waterstone Church, which is where we attend when we're there. So we see him quite often.
My regards.
I will do so. He was pretty excited when he found out that you were our pastor. He was very excited, actually. Okay, another question over here.
Corrie, I was interested to know whether you use screws or can you use nails on those boards?
Very good question. The answer is yes to all of it. It is a hardwood, so if we need to put in a large nail for things like the floor joists and whatnot, we have to drill the hole before we can pound the nail in, because otherwise we can't get the nail in. But Dad has, for framing, he can actually use his air gun, and that will get the nails in adequately. So a lot of the framing he's been using with his nail gun, framing nails. And then he also brought a bunch of finishing nails, so he's been using that for some of the smaller items. The roofing and the metal siding is put in with screws. And there's other parts where he used screws too, but then he ran out of screws and we haven't been able to, so it's a combination.
I was wondering what was in the water that your mom was washing. Is there any danger in the water, like alligators or crocodiles or in that area?
So
what kind of danger, if any, is that you have to deal with?
Okay. So the Sepik River does have crocodiles, but they don't actually come into our lake. So we're on an oxbow lake. Back in the 90s, there were crocodiles in it, but the crocodiles are very hunted and they've learned to stay away from people in populated areas. So even in the 90s, as a kid, I was able to swim in the river, in the water, and not have any issues. You just didn't swim after dark, because then the crocodiles would come out. But now the villagers all assure us that there are no crocodiles actually in our lake. There are types of fish that could potentially nibble on you. I've never been nibbled on, so I haven't worried about it too much. I mean, same family as piranhas, but even the piranhas on the Amazon, you can swim in the Amazon and not worry about them unless you're copiously bleeding or things like that. So sometimes National Geographic is not a good source for information because they like to show them in feeding frenzy, when in reality they're not going to be in that feeding frenzy except in very specific situations. And you can swim in the water without it being an issue. Dean.
So I had some questions about your transportation. First of all, you mentioned that you go several hours and then drive from there to go to the town. Does that mean you have to park your vehicle
Yes.
Elsewhere? Okay.
Yeah.
How does that work? Do you own a piece of property over there, or you just allow
No. So they have what they call a Wantok system. Wantok is relatives. So Jason, who has become part of our family, is related to somebody who lives in the village that is where the road connects with the river, meets the river. And so we leave our vehicle parked at his house, and we pay him a little bit to keep an eye on it for us. But that makes it so that we don't have to worry about it because a relative is keeping an eye on it for us, a family member. And then so we can just go upriver, jump in the car, and go. And we leave the boat next to his house as well.
And the other question I had is, I noticed you had some off-road vehicles. Is that how you get around, mostly around your area? Because I noticed there were a couple of motorcycles when you were loading your stuff.
Yeah. So we have the little scooters, but they don't work too well on the roads that are not paved. So we just kind of use them for in the village and stuff. But we do have a dirt bike. Dad's the only one who knows how to ride one. And so I actually have a pretty big scar on my leg from trying to learn how to ride it. So a dirt bike, motorcycle. It's a type of motorcycle that's specifically designed for off-road. But we still have one, and Dad will use it periodically when he needs to go, like when he wants to go visit the high school, which is only 5 miles away from us. But if we use the scooter, it still takes an hour or two to get there because you're basically going walking speed. But the dirt bike, you can go pretty fast. So, but Mom and I are a little bit leery of the dirt bikes. He asked about mountain bikes. We did, once we got there and saw the road conditions and stuff, I really wish that I had brought my electric mountain bike that I had. That would have been a perfect scenario, but I didn't, and I don't have access to that to purchase those things there. So we just make do with what we can. But yeah, an e-bike would be the perfect situation, because then you're not expending a lot of energy, but still going a fairly decent speed. But
So a couple questions. One, how is everyone's health holding up, you and your parents? And then also, what are your biggest needs?
So health-wise, we're holding up pretty well. Mom and Dad have both had malaria at least once since we've been there. I haven't yet. But otherwise, Dad also had a little bit of, I think he might have had COVID a couple of times as well, but not very seriously, and it went away. So now, as far as I know, they sounded in pretty good health when I talked to them a couple days ago. As far as our biggest needs, that's a really hard question, just because we're just moving forward. I would say one of the things that we're struggling with right now is getting our printers to actually print. The humidity, I think, has affected the paper that had been stored in the container. And so we do have a room in the house that is somewhat air conditioned to try to take the humidity out of the room, and that has helped to some extent. But we'll need to get a new supply of paper, I think, before we're fully 100% operational. So that's one thing. It's really, so I didn't share this too much yet, but it's really neat because Pastor Leonard Sumatow kind of shared with us what the union is focused on right now. And they're really focused on border evangelism, the border between Papua New Guinea and Papua Indonesia. And we're about 50 miles from the border. So when he was visiting with us, he was just so excited because he views our village of Tipas as kind of the springboard where they can have a base of operations, maybe a district headquarters, and springboard from our village upriver all the way to the border with Indonesia and just hit all of those villages along the way. All of their dreams obviously take money, takes financing, but God has already planned for that in a lot of ways because there's businessmen in the country itself who are eager and focused on making that happen. So we just move forward, and God provides. He provides. And my dad was telling me, he's like, if anything, this visit with Pastor Leonard has showed us God has 1,000 ways to provide, and we don't have to worry about it. So our biggest need, so to speak, is the need of the Holy Spirit to blanket the area and prepare the hearts of the people, because God is putting together a team between Adventist Frontier Missions, us, and the union, and the union and the mission. And if we can work together in unity, I would say that's a huge prayer request as well, that we can all be in unity. We all have the same dream, but so often we want to do it our own way, and we don't want to work together with somebody who might have a different way of doing it. So if we can work together to accomplish this goal of doing evangelism all along the border, things will move forward so much more rapidly. And I really believe that because God is orchestrating things, because he put my best friend together with an AFM missionary. So now we have a connection with them that we never would have had otherwise with AFM. And then Pastor Leonard Sumatow is becoming a closer and closer friend with our family as well. And so we kind of are maybe the middleman that's helping to draw the other two together to work together. I don't know. I'm just guessing, but that's kind of what it looks like to me. And yeah. Did I answer your question all right? Okay.
Do you have termites there?
Yes.
And they have to use that special wood to build so that the termites don't walk away with it?
Correct. The termites don't like the wood that we built with. Most of the villagers build their houses with much softer wood because their tools are limited to machetes and axes. And so they use smaller, lighter wood. So they're typically replacing their houses every 5 years. Yeah. Maybe they can get 10 years out of it, depending on if they're really conscientious about getting rid of any termites that they see starting in. But there's other beetles and bugs that bore into the wood as well, and we learned more about that by living in one of their bush houses than I ever wished to have learned. But yeah, the termites don't particularly like the Quila that we used. So
what do you think the lifespan of your wood is?
It should last until Jesus comes.
Amen.
Any other questions? I see somebody's hand in the back. Several, actually. Go for it.
What are your daily meals like?
Daily meals. Okay. Our favorite breakfast is a big bowl of papaya with lemon squeezed on it, and then some of Mom's homemade bread that we've toasted over the propane stovetop. We don't always have ripe papaya available, so if we don't have that, then Mom will we have a Vitamix blender, so she takes popcorn and grinds it into cornmeal, and she'll cook that as cornmeal mush. If we've been able to find oatmeal, she'll do maybe a mix of the cornmeal and the oatmeal, and then toast with bananas and whatever fruit we do have available. Lunch is most typically whatever garden produce we have available, whether that be squash, sweet potato, some greens, green beans, just whatever we have in the house. She'll make a soup with that, cook it all up in coconut milk with garlic and salt and other seasonings, and then we'll put that over rice, because we can get both brown and white rice in the town. And then dinner, Mom and I don't typically eat dinner, but Dad will oftentimes do a fruit smoothie, doing a blend of soy milk or fruit juice with frozen bananas that we've frozen from extra bananas that we have. So we do not get nuts. I have some nut trees growing that might eventually take the place of cashews if you want to go through the shelling process for enough of them to do something with them. Mom had me plant them, so maybe she'll do that. I don't know. Another question right back here.
I'm interested in knowing if solar power and such is available.
Yes.
And do you use it?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we have 8 batteries and 16 solar panels. Up until now, we've only been using half of the system, so we have 8 of the solar panels up and 4 of the batteries. And that's enough to keep our refrigerator going full time and lights. And sometimes Dad will even use his skill saw and stuff like that, especially now that we've got outlets in the house. But we also have a generator for the bigger tools like the track saw and the table saw and stuff like that. But the solar is definitely a must and a huge blessing.
Did you know Gary Roberts that flew mission plane over there?
Yes.
Have you heard how he's doing? I'd like to ask for prayer.
Absolutely.
That this church would pray for him
Absolutely.
and his family, because last I heard a day or so ago, his headaches have started in earnest. He has two tumors in his brain, and they're all together now in Spokane. They came from Loma Linda, from Malaysia to Loma Linda, and now
Okay.
Spokane, and now he's having a harder time walking. So this was a blessed Sabbath for them all being together. And
Yeah.
so if you think of him, because his grandpa and grandma, Les and Norma, were one of the first ones in this church, and Bob, his dad, grew up here. And so if whenever you're praying through the day, think of that family.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, Gary Roberts. So we actually spent a Christmas with them back in the 90s when Bob and Jan were still over there. And Gary and his brother were still at home, and his little sister Stephanie. And we spent a Christmas with them. Yes, Dean.
First, I was wondering what the chief language they speak there
Okay.
is. And then I was also wondering, because you mentioned about these two going to seminary or Bible college, and and people had also mentioned about any special needs. I'm wondering, is there any special beyond the PNG program that you're looking for donations for either their Bible college or anything else?
If you want to assist with their school fees, that would be awesome. You can just go through the State Line Church donation page and just mark it. It's for Last Frontier PNG, but just write a little note, and or just send us an email. That would even be better. Send us an email or a comment to let us know that that's specific. I don't know how much it's going to cost yet. Yes, yeah. My dad's email, if you want to write it down, if some of you don't have it, is jsample81@gmail.com. But yeah, we've had him fill out the application and put it in Pastor Sumatau's hands, but I don't know yet. He hasn't told me specifically what the cost is for that. I just know that we are planning to sponsor that through our mission funds. So even just donating to lastfrontierpng.org, that money will be going towards their school fees. And then your first question, what was it again? Chief language. So the official language of the country is actually English. So all of the schools are operated in English. And so the majority of the people have at least a rudimentary understanding of English, but out in the bush is very, very rudimentary. So you can't really get along without knowing the lingua franca, which is Melanesian Pidgin. Pidgin is, I would say, about 80% English and 20% other languages. But when they're speaking it, it's hard to tell that it's English because pronunciation is completely different, spelling is completely different. But me can story like long you lo talk pisin suppose you like na you talking me suppose you na parin me or no god. You had in me? No, you clear? Yeah. There you go. So the Melanesian Pidgin we learned when we were there in the 90s, so it came back pretty quickly. Each individual people group, though, has their own language as well. That one we haven't learned a lot of yet. We've just learned a few words. It's not as essential to learn it anymore because everybody knows the Melanesian Pidgin, and you can pretty much get across whatever you need to get across through that. But it's fun because they enjoy it when you at least throw around a few of the words from their talk place. So Sabat Tarawan is how they say Happy Sabbath. So that's one that we've learned pretty well to be able to say that at Sabbath on. at church.
Do you have to speak the pidgin for them to understand, or do they understand English? And it's more like you have to know.
There are a few that you would be able to get by with just doing English, but the majority of them need the talkpisin out in the bush. If you're out in town, you can get by with just English. But out in Tipas, it's much better if you have the talkpisin. At least if you, I mean, you can say things in English and they'll nod their head, but you have no idea if they actually understood you. Yes, smiles do go a long ways. Yeah, smiles and body language. But anybody else? Any other questions?
This isn't a question, Corrie, but please tell your dear mother that I haven't changed my mind. When I grow up, I want to be just like her.
Okay, I will tell her. I'm sad because I was going to put in a little video clip of her playing piano and Dad on the trumpet that we took on her birthday, May 21. Yes, it is up on YouTube at Last Frontier PNG. But I was going to share it with you guys today as well because I know how much you miss the trumpet and piano. That was her birthday present. We were trying so hard to actually move into the house on her birthday, but we didn't quite make it. So instead, Dad got the power wired into the outlet so that he could plug the piano in and set that up. And she was up in the bush house most of the day, but we brought her back. We told her to come down to the new house after lunch, and she came down and spent the rest of the day just playing the piano. She was in seventh heaven. And so were we, because then we worked the rest of the day with music. So that was awesome. But yeah, our website is listed up there. I don't know how many of you have gone online. I'm trying to keep it updated better now. My dad has been the one in charge of it, and he would write the email newsletter and just send it to Gary, and then that's it. And then the website went months and months and months without any updates. So on this trip, I decided I was going to take over that. So I went in and figured out how to do it, put all the newsletters up so they're all there. You can subscribe there, and I will be keeping the newsletter updates put there as they come instead of waiting months to get them up there. Oh, somebody's pulling up the video. Perfect. If we can turn the volume up a little bit, that'd be good. This was pretty much the first time Dad had pulled his trumpet out since we got there. So he apologizes for the mothballs. I will tell them.
Mom had already started baking bread.
Just one of the other videos. Sometimes we run out of propane partway through before we go to town, and we have to figure out how to bake the bread that Mom already started baking before we realized the gas was out. Just some of the fun challenges that when you're in the middle of it, you don't really even think about it. You just deal with it and make do and figure out a way to work around it, and then it just, then you make sure that you have enough gas next time. You don't run out. Any other questions? How much longer will I be in the U.S.? So my ticket from LA is on August 6th. So I still have a few weeks. I plan to go backpacking starting tomorrow because I miss the mountains. So I'll be in the mountains probably until Thursday, and then next Sabbath my uncle has asked me to possibly share at the Eastgate Church. And then Sunday the 27th, I'll be picking up a rental car and starting down towards LA, but I'll be stopping along the way and visiting additional friends and spending weekends with my Quincy church family along the way as I go. So Eastgate next Sabbath, August 3, I'll be down in Quincy, and then from there I'll drive down to LA and drop off my car at the airport when I go. So, yeah, thank you. We have another question. Do we still have the mics?
So is it possible to use like a wood stove, especially when the weather's really bad and makes it hard to go get the butane?
Yes. So the last time we were out in town, we actually purchased, we were able to find something very similar to a rocket stove. So it's a metal stove that allows you to build a small fire inside, and it makes it so that less fire makes more heat and focuses it where the pot will be. But we also, so after we ran out of the propane, we actually we had a 55-gallon drum, metal drum that we rigged up to be able to put a fire in that and have a grate over the top of it, so we'd have a fire we could stand at instead of having to bend over a fire on the ground. So there are ways and means of doing so, but we don't plan to run out of gas again, but you can't always plan for such things. I think we actually have a leak in the fuel line because I was keeping track of how long each gas bottle would last, and it would usually last between 4 and 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden it wasn't lasting more than a week and a half per bottle. So we got a leak somewhere, but we haven't been able to figure out where yet. So, but we were able to extend the life of the bottles by turning it off every time instead of leaving it on. So, but there's lots of fuel for fire, lots of firewood. So we're at least not having to go to a raw diet if we run out of gas. Another question in the back.
How are your folks getting along without you?
I think they miss me a lot. So I've been mostly in charge of the gardening and mowing the lawn and stuff like that. So I know they miss me in that regard, and I kind of wonder if my trees that I've planted are going to still be visible or if they're going to be under the bush by the time I get back again. Some of them where the lawn is able to be mowed will be just fine, but I have some out in the back 40 where it's, yeah, I'm not sure that they even know where all of them are planted, so I'm guessing there's going to be some I have to unbury, but yeah, that would be nice in some ways, not in others. she suggested goats or something like that. But yeah, no, they really miss having me there. And when they came out to town, Dad was complaining that Mom had forgotten to write down a list, and he was like, Corrie, we need you here, because I always have been the one in charge of the grocery shopping, and Mom just is kind of along for the ride. But yeah, and I really miss them too. I'm looking forward to getting back. Traveling is all well and good, but it gets old after a while. That's right. Home is where you go when you don't have anywhere else. Any further questions? Dean has another one.
So I imagine it's got to be a little bit of a culture shock going from, I mean, imagine it's a different pace of life, you know, from one place to another, you know, ease here, but distractions. Things are more difficult over there, but I mean, you don't have all the distractions. I mean, there was an African guy said once that, I don't know who it was, but he said that I felt sorry for people in the United States because they have so many things to distract them from worshiping God.
Yeah.
And I just got to imagine it's amazing to not even have the ability to have some of the distractions that we have here.
Right. God has taken away a lot of the distractions by not giving us access to internet or anything like that. So it's definitely a very different lifestyle. Also, the fact that we're so close to the equator and the sun rises at the same time and goes down at the same time all year round is really, really nice. Because then your body is like, you get into a set schedule where you know when bedtime is and you know when time to get up is. And we are away from the main part of the village enough that the birds are still close by. They're not farther back in the jungle. And so starting about 5:30, 6 o'clock every morning, we just get serenaded with these bird songs that are just, I mean, and our house doesn't have glass windows, so it's not closed off. We just have screened in. The whole side of the house is just screened in. And that's a pretty amazing alarm clock, if you think about it. As the sun is coming up, the birds are singing, and it just gets you into that worship mood so much easier than maybe here in the U.S. where you have the internet to distract you and you have, I got to get up and go do this and this and this. So it's definitely different, and I miss it. But it has its other set of challenges. Okay. If there's no more questions, let's go ahead and just close with prayer. And then if you think of something else, we can talk afterwards. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this time together, for the ability to share what you are doing in another part of the world. I just pray that you will be with our church family here, with everyone who's present, that your Spirit will fill them and help them to see and do the work that you have for them right here at home. We can be missionaries no matter where we are. And the biggest missionary work is to just live a life that is full of the Spirit. And I just pray that for each one of us, Father, that your love will flow through us to those around us, and that we will be a witness in every aspect of our lives. Please be with us as we leave this place. Bless us over the next week. May we gain fresh insight and new experience in our walk with you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hello, friend. My name is James Ash, and I want to personally thank you for watching our program today. If you would like to see more videos just like this, all you have to do is go to statelineadventmedia.org, and you can watch to your heart's content. And oh, by the way, don't forget to click the like, share, and subscribe buttons on each one of our various platforms. Because you see, my friend, this helps us reach more people with the good news of Jesus' soon return. Ministries like this require large teams of people. You would be amazed if you were to see how many people are required to produce each one of our programs. And if you would like to join with us by becoming a ministry partner, you can actually help us reach the unreached with the gospel. All you have to do is go to statelineadventmedia.org/donate, and you can give us a much-needed boost. Most importantly of all, friend, we need your prayers. I assure you that the devil does not like this ministry, and your prayers are what protect and direct what we do here. Once again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts.